Pam Drake said I should say, I love God and just call it a night. But spent a lot of time working on this, so I'll go through it instead. So good evening. My name is Tyler Rasmussen. If you don't know me or weren't sure of my name before, my wife and I came to the Shepherd of the Hills in 2021 after transplanting to Richfield from Milwaukee. We attended Holy Trinity in West Dallas, where just before COVID hit, we installed Jay Thorson as our pastor. For those of you who are newer to Shepherd, Pastor Jay was the pastor here years ago. So when we bought our house in Richfield and asked Pastor Jay if he had any recommendations in the area, he obviously suggested we come here. So Michelle and I met in 2006 when we both worked for a catering company. We got married in 2009 on a beach in Maui. I work as a bankruptcy attorney downtown Milwaukee, and Michelle is a business assistant for Germantown Dental out on Mequon Road. We both serve on as small group leaders for confirmation. Michelle's on the OCC committee, and I just joined council in January. We have two sons, Kyle and Carter. Kyle is 13. He's in 7th grade. He loves baseball and Pokemon. He is in confirmation and helps with Sunday school and children's church, but his passion is technology, so he really loves helping at the tech desk. Carter is 10. He's in 5th grade. He loves Lego and playing with his friends, and he'll be starting confirmation in the fall. My faith story can really be best described through two major life events. The first was a motorcycle trip when I was 15, and the second was a chance encounter at a bar in 2006. The first part of my faith story starts in middle school, during my confirmation experience. During my early teens in the mid-90s, I lived with my mom in Palmyra, which is out in Jefferson County. We attended St. Matthew Lutheran Church. Confirmation was pretty similar to here. We had weekly class, Bible study. We had discussions about living a Christian life and being a teenager. We had movie nights at people's houses. We had a bowling lock-in. We had game nights. We had some sort of sermon notes and requirements for attendance, and we also had a book report. For the book report, we had to pick any nonfiction book on a faith story. My mom helped me pick out a book. She picked the autobiography by Dennis Byrd. It's called Rise and Walk. So Dennis Byrd was a defensive lineman for the New York Jets back in the early 90s, who became paralyzed making a tackle. His story described his accident and the struggles to learn to walk again. He credited his recovery to his faith in God. My mom thought the story of Dennis Byrd learning how to walk again would resonate with me. That's because when I was about 2 years old, I was stricken with something called viral encephalitis, which is a swelling of the brain. One day I woke up and I was totally paralyzed. It took years of physical therapy for me to learn how to walk, write, tie my shoes, basically do everything again. So I took his book on a cross-country motorcycle trip. I was 15, and my mom and stepdad were avid BMW motorcycle riders. We rode the two motorcycles out to a couple of rallies, first in Colorado, Durango, Colorado, for a few days before heading to Angels Camp, California, for a few more days. During the trip, I would read Dennis Byrd's book. I remember feeling comforted by his faith and that it never wavered. We started the long ride back from California via the Pacific Coast Highway up through Oregon and then back across Idaho and into Yellowstone National Park. I remember reaching Yellowstone and being excited to see Old Faithful. My mom told me we had a hard deadline of when we had to be home, so we would stop, but we couldn't stay for very long. As it turned out, when we arrived, it was shortly after it had erupted, and the wait would be too long to stay until the next anticipated eruption, and the park closed at sunset, and you had to be out of the park by the time it closed. So we had to leave or we would be stuck in Yellowstone overnight. I was obviously disappointed, but knew we had to be home by that deadline. So we got on the bikes, we rode across the park as fast as we could. Then, suddenly as we rode along Highway 20, which skirts Yellowstone Lake, my mom's motorcycle let out a whir, kind of like a blender blade trying to blend when there's nothing in it. And we pulled over to the side of the road with a blown drive shaft. Within minutes of stopping, it was clear that we were stuck. My mom and stepdad were panicked. We couldn't all ride on his motorcycle. We weren't in a place where we could rent a car or a trailer. There were no cell phones at the time. We were just stuck on the side of the road in the middle of Yellowstone. And that's the moment I will never forget. As we sat there on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck to take us to a campground to spend the night and figure out what our next steps would be, I felt it. I became overwhelmed with God's presence like I had never felt before. I was calm. I knew we would be okay. I didn't know why I knew it, I just did. I'd like you to imagine the most beautiful sunset in one of the most beautiful remote places. Think about the calm, the colors, the sounds, the feel of the breeze. Think about that relaxing feeling you get when you stop and take it all in. Do you see it? Can you feel it? Well, eventually the tow truck came, took us to a campsite for the night. The next morning, my stepdad was able to find a drive shaft in California that the mechanic would overnight to the post office in Yellowstone. In the meantime, since we were stuck there, we got to go back and see Old Faithful, and I had time to finish the story of Dennis Bird. I think reading that story during that time helped me believe that God would also help us. By the next morning, we had the drive shaft. My stepdad was able to get it installed, and we were on our way. We had to ride through the night, I remember that because we ran out of gas in Minnesota. But we made it home early the morning of the deadline, and all was good. But that moment by the lake and having that book really stayed with me, still does. Now, for the second part of my faith story, I want you to imagine those people that showed you true discipleship, that either led you to God or kept you from straying. Like many people, I drifted away from the church as I started working in high school, which turned into college and into my early 20s. I was self-involved, self-centered. I was destructive, and I made a lot of mistakes. In my 20s, I split my time between my two jobs, the gym, and the bars, and there was no time for anything else. On September 7th, 2006, I was out at a bar with some friends from the gym celebrating someone's birthday. That's when my life changed. I ran into a girl that I knew from the catering job. We had worked together only once or twice, but she had told me her favorite bar was Buckhead, which is a bar in Milwaukee, or used to be. I had said something to the effect of, "You're like 17, you're not going out to bars." Well, that night I walked up to her, she was there, and I said, "Well, I guess you really are old enough to be here." As if you haven't figured it out already, that woman was my wife. Now, Michelle and I, we were both raised by our grandparents. For me, that was my grandpa. In my teens, he and I were inseparable. We did everything together, and he meant everything to me. He was diagnosed with cancer when I was 15. On the day I was confirmed, he missed my party, something he never would have done. I called him as soon as the party was done, and he said he was feeling a little sick and run down from treatment. I told him how disappointed I was he wasn't there and how much I missed him. I told him I loved him. That much I remember. The next day when I got home from school, my dad was sitting at home waiting for me. He told me overnight that Grandpa had taken his own life. My grandpa showed me what it was to be a good person and to do unto others. He kept me from straying. Michelle was also raised in large part by her grandma Ruth. I believe Ruth was the one who instilled such a strong faith in Michelle. Her mom was a single parent and worked full time, so as a kid, Michelle would spend a significant amount of time at Grandma Ruth's house. Ruth also lived right around the corner from their church, St. John's in Wauwatosa. She was extremely active in her church and in Wisconsin Lutheran High School, where Michelle went to school. And she showed Michelle what true discipleship is. When Michelle's mom moved to Louisiana when she was about 22, I believe Ruth was probably the main reason why Michelle felt confident that she could stay here in Wisconsin. I remember one of the first times Michelle ever took me to meet her grandma and go to her house for dinner. The three of us sat down at her dining room table, and she pulled out a piece of sheet music and said, "I wrote this hymn, and I want the three of us to sing it together." I'm sure I gave Michelle a look of pure fear and confusion. As the three of us struggled to figure out just what this tune to this original song was with no instruments, I kind of realized the importance of God and church in Michelle's life, and that it came from her grandma. I just have to say, for Michelle's sake, my favorite thing Ruth used to say was, "Oh, Michelle." And she would say that whether she was happy or mad or irritated, it always sounded the same. Ruth was at our wedding celebration in 2010, and Ruth got to see her great-grandchildren many times. We lost Ruth in 2019, and I know Michelle still misses her every day. Ruth kept Michelle from straying. Michelle led me back to church. Michelle told me we needed to find a church we could attend together. That led me back to church for the first time since high school. That led us to Holy Trinity in West Dallas, which led us here. I'm not sure if my spiritual journey would have brought me back to church if it weren't for Michelle, but I can guarantee you that if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be here tonight. So for that, I say thank you, babe. I love you. Those two events, being overwhelmed by God's presence in 1995 and meeting my wife in 2006, they're the basis of my faith story. Becoming an active member here at Shepherd is built on that foundation. Where my story goes from here, that's still up to God. Thank you.